Then you should probably answer yours. Nathan Cole said it so calmly that Charlotte Whitmore almost laughed again. Two Chicago police officers stood beside him beneath the 40-foot glass wall of Whitmore Dynamics, one fastening handcuffs around his wrists while 300 employees, investors, reporters, and executives watched from the launch floor. 11 minutes earlier, Charlotte had been preparing to unveil Atlas, the artificial intelligence infrastructure platform expected to anchor a $2.4 billion expansion. Now her security chief was holding Nathan's phone in an evidence bag, and Graham Voss, her trusted chief operating officer, was telling everyone that the quiet technical contractor had been caught stealing the system's protected files. Charlotte looked at Nathan as if the mystery had finally solved itself. For months, something about him had irritated her. The way he questioned senior engineers without raising his voice, the way he refused to flatter her, the way he sometimes looked at Atlas diagrams as though he remembered them rather than studied them. Graham leaned closer. We found the files on his account. There's nothing to discuss. Nathan said nothing. That silence bothered Charlotte more than denial would have. You had access to something worth billions, she said. Did you really think we'd let you walk out with it? Nathan's eyes moved briefly toward the enormous Atlas logo glowing behind her. There was no panic in them, no embarrassment, only something Charlotte could not identify yet. Disappointment. One reporter lifted a phone, then another. Charlotte noticed and made no attempt to stop them. Nathan had betrayed her company in front of the people whose trust she needed most. If the world watched him leave, so be it. Graham smiled. Everybody has a price. Charlotte gave a short laugh. Nathan finally looked at him. Not everybody. One officer asked whether there was anyone Nathan needed to contact before they left. For the first time, his composure cracked, but only slightly. His eyes went to the clock above reception. 4:12 p.m., my daughter gets out of robotics club at 5, he said. She'll be waiting for me. The officer nodded. You can make one call. Charlotte folded her arms. Take his phone, too. Company security can provide whatever number he needs. Nathan turned toward her. Then you should probably answer yours. Her phone vibrated before she could respond. The screen showed board chairman Robert Hayes. She declined it. 3 seconds later, it rang again. Then Graham's phone started vibrating. Then the general counsel's. Across the launch floor, the chief financial officer stared at his screen and went pale. Charlotte's smile disappeared. What's happening? She asked. Nobody answered immediately. The general counsel stepped toward her, holding his phone as though the words on it had suddenly become dangerous. Charlotte, Northern Continental just froze the Atlas financing review. Why? They received a legal notice. Another executive hurried over. Our insurer suspended certification on the launch. Charlotte looked past them toward Nathan. He had not moved. What did you do? She asked. Nathan glanced, once at the glowing Atlas logo, then back at her. I made the call you should have made before you put me in handcuffs. Her phone rang a third time. This time, she answered. The chairman did not say hello. Charlotte, he said, stop the launch. Right now. And whatever you do not let Nathan Cole leave this building. 4 months earlier, Nathan Cole was standing barefoot in a narrow kitchen on the northwest side of Chicago at 5:42 in the morning, trying to make a pancake look like a rabbit. That looks like a potato with ears, Sophie said from the table. Nathan studied the pan. It is an abstract rabbit. Sophie was 8, serious when she drew and merciless when she judged her father's cooking. She smiled and returned to the sheet of graph paper beside her cereal bowl. Since Rebecca died 4 years earlier, mornings had become Nathan's private measure of whether life was still holding together. Breakfast, lunch packed, backpack checked, hair brushed badly enough that Sophie usually fixed it herself. Nothing impressive, nothing anyone at Whitmore Dynamics would have noticed. Nathan slid the pancake on her plate and stopped. Sophie had drawn a network of bridges connecting tiny buildings across the page. In the center was a symbol made from 3 intersecting lines inside a circle. Nathan's hand went still. Where did you see that? Sophie looked up. I did not see it. Mom drew it. The kitchen suddenly felt quieter. In her blue notebook, the one in your closet, Nathan sat across from her. You went through that box. I was looking for pictures. She turned the paper toward him. Was it hers? Nathan looked at the symbol for several seconds. Finish breakfast. We have to leave in 20 minutes. Sophie knew that tone. It meant the question had not disappeared. It had only been locked somewhere she could not follow. After dropping her at school, Nathan returned home, opened the bedroom closet, and pulled a cedar box from the highest shelf. Inside were Rebecca's wedding ring, 2 photographs, an old employee badge, and a blue engineering notebook he had not opened since the week after a funeral. He touched the cover, then closed the box again. At 8:35, Nathan entered Whitmore Dynamics through the contractor entrance. His badge identified him as a systems reliability consultant, which sounded more important than the way most executives treated him. He was the man people called when something stopped working and forgot when it worked again. That suited him. By 10:15, 3 senior engineers were gathered around an Atlas diagnostic screen that had been producing synchronization errors since midnight. Nathan watched the data for less than a minute. Your routing sequence is backward. One engineer frowned. That architecture was approved years ago. I know. Nathan reached for the keyboard, changed 2 parameters, and restarted the simulation. The error vanished. Nobody spoke. How did you know that? The engineer asked. Nathan picked up his coffee. Because systems repeat their mistakes. From the glass corridor above them, Charlotte Whitmore happened to be walking beside Graham Voss. She stopped. Who is that? Graham followed her gaze. Contractor. Nathan Cole. Charlotte watched Nathan leave without waiting for praise. He fixed Alice? A minor diagnostic issue, Graham said. Charlotte continued walking. Graham did not. His eyes remained on Nathan until the elevator doors closed. That afternoon, Nathan returned home to find Sophie drawing at the kitchen table again. This time, she had colored the symbol blue. Dad, she said, I remembered something else. Mom had a name for it. Nathan slowly set his keys down. Sophie pointed at the 3 intersecting lines. She called it Atlas. Charlotte Whitmore had spent 11 years learning that hesitation was expensive. At 36, she could walk into a boardroom filled with men who had known her father longer than she had been alive and silence the room without raising her voice. Whitmore Dynamics employed more than 6,000 people, managed infrastructure across 14 states, and was preparing Atlas for the largest commercial launch in company history. Charlotte knew the revenue forecast from memory. She knew which investors needed reassurance, which directors wanted her chair, and exactly how much cash the company could lose before the market noticed. What she did not know was why a quiet contractor named Nathan Cole could diagnose Atlas faster than engineers who had worked on it for years. The next morning, she found him in a 7th-floor testing lab studying a simulation. Mr. Cole. Nathan turned. Miss Whitmore. No nerviosismo. No sudden attempt to look busy. Charlotte noticed both. I am told you corrected yesterday's synchronization problem. I corrected one symptom. There is another. Nathan pointed toward the screen. There will be. Charlotte stepped closer. Atlas was scheduled for a major architecture upgrade that weekend. One Graham had assured her was ready. Engineering approved this. Then engineering should run the failure model again. Her expression cooled. You are a contractor. Yes. And 73 engineers reviewed this upgrade. Then 73 engineers missed the same thing. Charlotte stared at him. Most employees softened their language around her. Nathan seemed almost incapable of it. Do you understand who you work for? She asked. Nathan met her eyes. I understand what I am responsible for. You work for me. That does not make bad engineering good. The silence lasted long enough for the ventilation system to become noticeable. Charlotte should have ended the conversation there. Instead, she asked, what happens if we deploy it? Nathan turned back to the simulation. Probably nothing at first. Under peak demand, routing begins duplicating priority commands. One region compensates for another until the system cannot tell correction from error. How long? Depends on load. Worst case, you lose control of the network long enough to wish somebody had listened. Charlotte disliked the answer. She disliked even more that he sounded concerned rather than pleased. Graham appeared in the doorway several minutes later and glanced. From Charlotte to Nathan. Is there a problem? Mr. Cole thinks the Atlas upgrade is unstable. Graham gave a patient smile. Mr. Cole is not on the Atlas architecture team. Nathan closed the simulation. Then your architecture team can prove me wrong. He walked past them and left. Graham waited until the door shut. He enjoys making himself important. Charlotte looked through the glass wall as Nathan crossed the corridor. Does he? People like Cole find one weakness and convince executives they are indispensable. It is leverage. Charlotte said nothing. That evening, she stayed after everyone else had gone and reran the failure model herself. At 11:18, the simulation failed exactly where Nathan predicted. The next morning, she ordered the upgrade postponed. She did not tell Nathan. She did not thank him. But for the first time, she searched his personnel record. It contained an address, a contractor agreement, 12 years of vaguely described systems work, and almost nothing else. No university. No former employer worth naming. No explanation for how he knew Atlas. At the bottom was an emergency contact, Sophie Cole, daughter. Charlotte was still reading when Graham entered without knocking. He saw Nathan's file on her screen and stopped for half a second. Something wrong? Charlotte asked. Graham smiled. Not yet. Later, alone in his office, Graham opened an archived access terminal, typed Nathan Cole into a restricted search field, and watched an old directory appear. One result remained. He stared at it, then quietly deleted Charlotte's access request. The directory name was Cole Whitmore Original Architecture. 3 weeks later, a Thursday morning began with the kind of ordinary problem Nathan could not solve with engineering. Sophie called from the nurse's office at 11:27. A water pipe had failed near her classroom. The school was closing early, and every emergency contact Nathan trusted was working. By noon, Sophie was sitting beside his desk on the 7th floor of Whitmore Dynamics with a sketchbook, a turkey sandwich, and strict instructions not to touch anything that had a blinking light. That eliminates most of the building, she whispered. Nathan almost smiled. Start with the sandwich. Sophie lasted 40 minutes before curiosity won. Nathan had been called into a diagnostics room when she wandered no farther than the open atrium, where a 12-foot illuminated model of Atlas stood behind glass. Blue lines crossed a miniature city, linking hospitals, transit stations, power systems, and emergency services. Sophie stared at the symbol at its center. 3 intersecting lines inside a circle. That is wrong, she said. Excuse me. Charlotte Whitmore stood several feet behind her, carrying a tablet. Sophie pointed at the display. The middle part. The lines are backwards. Charlotte looked at the child, then at the model. And how would you know that? My mom drew it. Charlotte stopped. Your mother? Sophie nodded. She used to draw that symbol in her blue notebook. Dad has it. Nathan's voice came from behind them. Sophie. The girl turned and immediately recognized the warning in his face. Nathan walked over, calm but quicker than usual. I told you to stay by my desk. I did mostly. Charlotte looked from Sophie to Nathan. She says her mother drew the Atlas symbol. Nathan picked up Sophie's backpack. Children remember things in unusual ways. That sounded like an answer designed not to answer me. It was. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. Who was your wife? For the first time since Charlotte had known him, Nathan looked genuinely guarded. Her name was Rebecca. Rebecca what? Cole. Did she work here? Nathan held Charlotte's gaze. You should ask your records department. Then he turned to Sophie. We are leaving. Sophie looked embarrassed. Did I do something bad? Nathan's expression softened immediately. No, sweetheart. You asked a question. Charlotte watched them disappear into the elevator. That sentence stayed with her all afternoon. At 7:40 that evening, long after most of the executive floor had emptied, Charlotte entered the corporate archive herself. She searched Rebecca Cole. Nothing. She searched Nathan Cole. Contractor records appeared, but nothing older. Then she searched the original Atlas development years. A corrupted index returned one archive directory that should not have been visible. Cole Whitmore Original Architecture. Charlotte clicked it. Access restricted. She entered her executive credentials. Access revoked by administrator. Charlotte stared at the message. As chief executive officer, there were almost no company files she could not open. She called information security. Who revoked my archive permissions? The technician hesitated. According to the log, Executive Administration. Name. Another pause. Graham Voss. Charlotte ended the call. Across town, Graham was already sitting in his darkened office with the same archive open on a private terminal. Inside were scanned contracts, engineering diagrams, and a photograph dated 9 years earlier. A younger Nathan stood beside Charlotte's father. Beside Nathan was Rebecca, smiling, one hand resting on a whiteboard covered with the earliest Atlas design. Graham studied the photograph, then opened another window and began moving files. He had spent years making sure Charlotte never saw that picture. Now an 8-year-old girl had remembered what an entire corporation had been taught to forget. Graham Voss did not destroy the old files. Men like Graham rarely destroyed anything that might someday become useful. He moved them, renamed them, and made certain the people who mattered could no longer find them. By Friday morning, Charlotte's archive access had been restored with an explanation about a routine permissions error, and the directory she had seen the night before was gone. Graham arrived in her office carrying coffee and an apology from information security. "You were right to question it," he said. "We are auditing the system." Charlotte watched him place the cup on her desk. "Why was your name attached to the restriction?" "Legacy permissions from your father's administration. I will have legal review it." The answer was smooth enough to sound reasonable. That was what made Graham valuable. It was also what made him dangerous. Charlotte did not yet know which one she was looking at. 2 floors below, Nathan opened a diagnostic console and saw something that made him stop. His credentials had accessed a protected Atlas repository at 2:13 that morning. Nathan had been home at 2:13. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him to finish repairing the kitchen faucet, and he had carried her to bed shortly after 10. He checked the authentication trail. The login looked perfect. Badge verification. Password token. Contractor identification. 46 restricted files copied to an external destination. Too perfect. Nathan quietly exported the audit trail to a secure record and closed the screen. At 11, Graham appeared beside his desk. "Problem?" Nathan looked up. "You tell me." Graham smiled. "Launch is in 6 weeks. Everyone is under pressure. Pressure reveals things. So, does curiosity." Their eyes held for a moment. Graham lowered his voice. "You built a quiet life, Nathan. A little house. A good school for Sophie. I imagine that took effort after Rebecca." Nathan's expression changed by almost nothing. "Do not use my daughter's name." Graham stepped back. "I was being considerate." Then stop. That afternoon, Nathan opened Rebecca's cedar box at home. Beneath the blue notebook was a sealed legal envelope he had hoped never to need again. He could walk into Charlotte's office with it. He could explain Atlas, the original agreement, and what Graham had spent years hiding. But Rebecca's name would enter a corporate fight she had wanted their daughter protected from, and Sophie's inheritance would become leverage for people who measured everything in dollars. Nathan put the envelope back. He needed proof first. Graham moved faster. On launch day, the Whitmore lobby filled with investors, employees, cameras, and a glowing Atlas display. At 3:58, corporate security approached Nathan near the technical station. Charlotte came down from the executive level with Graham beside her. "Nathan Cole," she said, "security found proprietary Atlas files transferred under your credentials." Nathan looked at Graham, then at Charlotte. "And you believe I stole them?" "The evidence says you did." "Evidence says whatever the person arranging it needs it to say." Graham shook his head. "There it is. No denied." Charlotte's face hardened. She had spent weeks wondering who Nathan really was. Now she believed she had her answer. The police arrived minutes later after corporate security reported the alleged theft. Nathan cooperated without argument. Employees gathered. Cameras turned. Graham leaned toward Charlotte and murmured, "Everybody has a price." Charlotte gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Nathan heard it. That hurt more than the accusation, though his face never showed it. As the officers prepared to escort him away, he looked at Charlotte and said quietly, "You had one chance to ask the right question." Charlotte folded her arms. "Which question?" Nathan glanced toward the enormous Atlas symbol glowing behind her. "Who owns what you think I stole?" The officer had just asked whether Nathan needed to contact anyone before they left when he looked at the clock above reception. 4:12. My daughter finishes robotics club at 5, he said. I need to make sure someone picks her up. The officer nodded and allowed him one call. Corporate security had already taken Nathan's phone, so he gave the officer a number from memory. Charlotte watched from beneath the glowing Atlas display as Nathan spoke in the same controlled voice he used when discussing engineering. Margaret, it is Nathan Cole. Activate the Whitmore Independent Ownership Review. Full scope. Atlas architecture, derivative systems, licensing history, and Rebecca's protected interest. There was a pause. Nathan listened. Yes, I am sure. He ended the call. Graham gave a quiet laugh. A lawyer is not going to change what happened here. Nathan looked at him. No, records will. Then the first phone rang. Charlotte's. She declined it. The second belonged to Whitmore's general counsel. The third belonged to the chief financial officer. Within minutes, the celebration in the lobby had become a room full of executives staring at screens. Northern Continental suspended its financing review. Whitmore's insurer placed Atlas certification on hold. Outside counsel issued an immediate preservation notice covering 9 years of engineering records. The board chairman called Charlotte 3 times before she answered. Stop the launch, Robert Hayes said. And do not let Nathan Cole leave until counsel arrives. Charlotte turned away from the crowd. He is being detained for stealing Atlas files. Silence came from the other end. Then Hayes said, Charlotte, according to the notice I just received, Nathan Cole may have authored the architecture you are accusing him of stealing. Charlotte looked at Nathan. For the first time, the handcuffs looked less like proof and more like a question. That is impossible. Then explain why his name appears on the original development record. Graham stepped closer. Charlotte, this is intimidation. He planned this. Nathan heard him. If I planned it, Graham, why did I wait until you framed me? The general counsel approached holding a tablet. Police need to pause the complaint. The access logs are being challenged, and we have a chain of custody problem with the internal evidence. Charlotte lowered her voice. Show me the ownership notice. The document contained dates, contract references, and 2 names she had never expected to see together. Nathan Cole. Rebecca Cole. Nathan's original systems architecture covered the routing framework beneath Atlas, but Rebecca's protected patent interest covered the adaptive synchronization method that made the commercial platform scalable. Charlotte read the page twice. Rebecca was your wife. Nathan said nothing. Why did nobody tell me? You never asked the right people. Charlotte turned to Graham. His face remained controlled, but the confidence had left his eyes. Open the original archive. We should let legal handle this. Open it. The recovered files appeared on the lobby conference screen minutes later. Engineering diagrams. Agreements signed by Charlotte's father. A photograph of Nathan, Rebecca, and him standing beside the first Atlas prototype. Then legal opened the succession record attached to Rebecca's. Patent interest. Charlotte expected Nathan's name. It was not there. Rebecca had transferred her ownership interest into a protected family trust before her death. The beneficiary was Sophie Cole. Charlotte stared at the name of the 8-year-old girl who had stood in this building 3 weeks earlier and said her mother drew the symbol. The general counsel spoke carefully. Until this is resolved, Whitmore cannot represent that it controls all commercial rights to Atlas. Charlotte looked at Nathan. So you can shut down the company? Nathan's answer came quietly. I do not want your company. He glanced at Graham, then back at her. I want the truth about what happened to my wife's work. Behind Charlotte, another recovered document appeared on the screen. It was an authorization signed 7 years earlier, directing that Rebecca Cole's name be removed from an internal Atlas ownership summary. The signature at the bottom did not belong to Charlotte's father. It belonged to Graham Voss. For 7 years, Graham Voss had survived by making every lie look like paperwork. Now the paperwork was looking back at him. Charlotte stood beneath the Atlas display, while Whitmore's general counsel enlarged the authorization carrying Graham's signature. Around them, the launch floor had gone almost silent. The police had removed Nathan's handcuffs after counsel withdrew support for the complaint, but Nathan did not rub his wrists or demand an apology. He simply asked whether someone had contacted Sophie's robotics teacher. Charlotte stared at him. His company was questioning a multi-billion-dollar launch. His dead wife's name had just surfaced in records hidden for years, and his first concern was still his daughter. "My assistant will pick her up," Charlotte said. Nathan's expression hardened. "No, Margaretchen will get her. Sophie does not become part of this building's damage control." Charlotte felt the words land because she knew she had earned them. Graham stepped forward. "This proves nothing. I signed hundreds of administrative documents for your father." Robert Hayes had joined the emergency meeting by video. "Then you will not mind explaining the next one." Legal opened another recovered file. 7 years earlier, Charlotte's father had ordered a formal review after discovering Rebecca's synchronization patent had been removed from an internal ownership schedule. His handwritten instruction was simple: restore the Cole attribution and preserve all licensing rights. The review had never reached the board. Graham had closed it 11 days later, labeling the matter resolved. Charlotte looked at him. "My father tried to correct this." Graham's jaw tightened. "Your father was sick. The company needed stability. So you decided what truth we could afford." He did not answer. Nathan finally spoke. "Rebecca discovered the ownership records had been altered. Your father believed it was an accounting mistake." "I did not." Charlotte turned toward him. "Why did you leave?" Nathan looked at the photograph still displayed on the screen. Rebecca was smiling beside the first Atlas prototype, younger than Charlotte had ever known Nathan to look. Rebecca was diagnosed 6 weeks after. That review began. "We had a daughter who was 4. I had a choice between spending her last year fighting people in conference rooms or spending it with my family." His voice remained steady. "I chose my family." No one in the room interrupted him. "After she died, I stopped caring whose name was on a building. The original license remained valid. Sophie was protected, and I thought that was enough." Charlotte looked at the enormous Atlas symbol above them and understood why Nathan had never wanted recognition. To him, it was not a corporate logo. It was something Rebecca had once drawn at a kitchen table. Graham broke the silence. "Whatever happened years ago, Whitmore built Atlas into what it is today. Nathan knows what this review will do. He is holding the company hostage." Nathan faced him. "I have asked for no money." "Not yet. I do not want Charlotte's company." Nathan turned to Charlotte. "I want Rebecca's work restored. I want every altered record preserved. I want an independent investigation. And I want my daughter kept out of your public relations strategy." Charlotte had spent her adult life negotiating from strength. For the first time, she had nothing Nathan needed. No salary could impress him. No title could restore what she had allowed to be taken. Robert Hayes spoke from the screen. "Charlotte, the board needs your recommendation." Graham looked at her, as if 15 years of loyalty should answer the question for her. Nathan did not look at her at all. Charlotte slowly removed her chief executive badge from her jacket and placed it on the table. "Suspend Graham's authority immediately. Give investigators unrestricted access. Freeze the Atlas launch until the Cole rights are verified. If the board believes that decision cost me my position, they can have my badge tonight." Graham stared at her. Nathan finally looked up. Charlotte met his eyes, but there was no victory in hers now. "And correct Rebecca Cole's name everywhere we erased it." Nathan remained silent. Then legal opened one final document recovered from Graham's private archive. It was dated 3 days before Rebecca's death. Charlotte read the first line, and the color left her face. The document was not about Atlas ownership. It was a letter from Rebecca Cole addressed personally to Charlotte Whitmore. The letter had waited 7 years for the wrong person to stop hiding it. Charlotte read the date again, then Rebecca Cole's name at the bottom, written in a hand weakened by illness, but still unmistakably deliberate. Nathan stood across the conference table, staring at the page without reaching for it. "Did you know she wrote this?" Charlotte asked. "No." For once, his answer carried no guarded edge, only surprise. Charlotte began reading silently. Rebecca had written that Atlas was never supposed to become a monument to any one person. She described Charlotte's father as imperfect but honorable, a man trying to correct mistakes before they became permanent. Then came the sentence that made. "Charlotte, sit down." Rebecca had asked Charlotte if the letter ever reached her, to remember that leadership was not measured by how quickly someone punished failure, but by how carefully they searched for truth before deciding who had failed. Graham had intercepted the letter before Charlotte ever saw it. She closed her eyes for a moment. Nathan did not comfort her. He should not have. By midnight, Graham's system access had been suspended. Every relevant archive had been preserved for independent investigators, and Charlotte had authorized outside counsel to review the false evidence used against Nathan. She also ordered Whitmore's communications team to issue no statement blaming him. 3 days later, the company publicly restored Rebecca Cole as co-creator of the original Atlas architecture and acknowledged the Cole family trust protected rights. Charlotte's board warned her that the admission could cost millions. "Then we pay what truth costs," she said. She did not call Nathan afterward. She did not send flowers, a settlement offer, or an executive with an apology drafted by legal. On Saturday morning, Charlotte drove herself to Nathan's modest brick house, carrying only Rebecca's original letter in a plain envelope. Sophie opened the door wearing socks with tiny planets on them. She looked up at Charlotte and immediately recognized her. "You are the lady from Dad's work." Charlotte nodded. "I am." Sophie considered that. "He is making pancakes." From the kitchen, Nathan called. "Sophie, who is it?" Charlotte answered before the girl could. "It is Charlotte." Silence. Then Nathan appeared in the hallway. He looked at the envelope, then at her. "Why are you here?" "Because an apology in a conference room would be easier." Nathan waited. Charlotte continued. "I believed evidence because it supported what I had already decided about you. I let you be humiliated in front of people who trusted my judgment." I laughed. Her voice became quieter. "I cannot undo that." Nathan said nothing. "Graham has been suspended pending the investigation. The board has restored Rebecca's attribution. I gave investigators unrestricted access, including my own records. If they conclude I failed my duties, I will accept that." Nathan looked towards Sophie, who had returned to the table but was listening with the concentration of a child pretending not to. "Are you doing this because you need my signature?" he asked. "No. You do need it." "Yes. But that is not why I am here." Charlotte handed him Rebecca's letter. "This belongs with your daughter, not in my archive." Nathan took it carefully. "I am not ready to forgive you." Charlotte nodded. "I did not come to collect forgiveness." That answer changed something small in his face. Not trust. Not yet. But perhaps the absence of complete distrust. Sophie called from the kitchen. "Dad, your pancake is burning." Nathan closed his eyes. Charlotte almost smiled. "You should probably get that." He turned toward the kitchen, then stopped. For several seconds, he seemed to argue with himself. Finally, he stepped aside from the doorway. "Coffee." Charlotte looked at him. "Only if that is not forgiveness." "It is coffee." She entered. Sophie watched Charlotte sit at their small kitchen table, then pushed a sheet of paper toward her. It showed the Atlas symbol beside 3 stick figures. Charlotte pointed to the tallest one. "Who is that?" "Dad." "And that one?" "Me." Charlotte looked at the third figure. Sophie picked up her blue crayon. "I have not decided yet." 6 months later, the Atlas symbol still glowed above the main lobby of Whitmore Dynamics, but Rebecca Cole's name now appeared beneath it. Charlotte had insisted on that herself. The independent investigation confirmed that Graham Voss had altered ownership records, concealed correspondence, manipulated internal access logs, and created the evidence used to accuse Nathan. He was removed from the company, and the findings were turned over to the appropriate authorities. Charlotte survived the board vote by 3 votes, though she never spoke of it as a victory. The company lost money, delayed the Atlas launch, and spent months rebuilding agreements with investors and partners. Charlotte accepted every consequence without asking Nathan to make it easier. Nathan eventually approved a new licensing agreement on behalf of Sophie's trust, but he refused the executive position the board offered him. Instead, he became an independent technical trustee with one condition written into his schedule before compensation was ever discussed. Every afternoon after 3:15 belonged to Sophie. Charlotte had smiled when she read it. "Non-negotiable?" she asked. "Completely." She signed beneath it. Their relationship changed slowly after that. Charlotte stopped summoning Nathan to her office and started walking downstairs when she needed him. Nathan stopped calling her Miss Whitmore and eventually called her Charlotte without noticing when the change happened. They disagreed often, sometimes sharply, but she learned that Nathan's refusal was rarely disrespect, and he learned that Charlotte's control was often fear wearing an expensive suit. Sophie noticed everything before either of them did. Charlotte began attending the girls' robotics competitions, first because Whitmore sponsored one, then because Sophie asked whether she would come to the next. At a regional competition in Milwaukee, Sophie ran across the gym holding a second-place ribbon and handed it to Charlotte while Nathan was carrying her project. "Hold this. Dad drops things when he is proud." Nathan objected. Charlotte laughed. It was the first time he had heard that laugh without remembering the lobby. That mattered. Weeks became months. Charlotte learned how Rebecca liked her coffee from stories Nathan could finally tell without going quiet afterward. Nathan learned that Charlotte ate dinner alone most nights because success had given her thousands of employees and almost nobody she trusted enough to sit beside. Neither tried to replace what the other had lost. They simply stopped pretending loss was the only thing allowed to remain. One Saturday morning, Charlotte arrived at Nathan's house carrying groceries because Sophie had decided they needed blueberry pancakes. Nathan opened the door and looked at the bags. "You know, grocery delivery exists. Your daughter said that was cheating." From the kitchen, Sophie shouted, "It is." Charlotte walked past him. 10 minutes later, smoke drifted above the skillet. Nathan leaned against the counter, watching Charlotte examine a pancake that had somehow burned around the edges while remaining pale in the middle. "That is impressive," he said. "I run a multi-billion-dollar company." The pancake does not appear intimidated. Sophie laughed, so hard she nearly spilled her orange juice. Charlotte looked at Nathan, and he was smiling now, not politely, not cautiously, just smiling. Sophie climbed down from her chair and opened the cabinet. She took out 3 plates. Nathan noticed. So did Charlotte. Neither said anything. Sophie placed 1 plate at Nathan's seat, 1 at hers, and a third across from them. Months earlier, she had drawn 3 figures beside the Atlas symbol and said she had not decided who the third one was. Now she set a fork beside Charlotte's plate as if the answer had become obvious. Nathan looked around the small kitchen that had once held only memories of the family he lost. He had spent years believing healing meant learning to live with an empty chair. He understood now that it could mean something else. Not forgetting, not replacing, simply making room. Charlotte sat beside Sophie. Nathan brought the pancakes to the table. And for the first time in years, there were 3 plates waiting for breakfast.